Debt ceiling deal signed into law by President Joe Biden. On Saturday, President Joe Biden gave his signature to a piece of legislation that raises the limit on the amount of debt that the United States is allowed to carry. This prevented an unprecedented default on the debt owed by the federal government. The signing, which took place behind closed doors at the White House, was announced by the White House in an emailed statement in which Vice President Joe Biden praised congressional leaders for their collaboration. The Department of the Treasury had issued a warning that the nation will begin to run short of cash to pay all of its debts on Monday, which would have sent shockwaves through the economy of the United States as well as the economies of other countries around the world. The impasse that resulted from the refusal of Republicans to increase the country's borrowing limit unless Democrats agreed to cut spending was overcome after weeks of hard negotiations between the White House and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The Republicans' position was that they would not raise the ceiling until Democrats agreed to cut expenditures. At first, Biden refused to talk with McCarthy on the debt ceiling. Instead, he insisted that the House had to pass a clean bill that would not include any provisions relating to policy or expenditure reductions. In January, Vice President Joe Biden was quoted as saying, "I will not let anyone use the full faith and credit of the United States of America as a bargaining chip." However, the newly elected Republican Speaker of the House stated that the chamber would not agree to lift the debt limit if severe spending cutbacks were not first implemented. McCarthy was able to wrangle his tiny majority to approve a partisan package at the end of April that would impose budget cuts in exchange for increasing the debt ceiling. This was accomplished even though the Republican Party is split into sections, with more conservative Republicans demanding harsher spending cuts and policy changes. The final passing of that bill in the House was a contributing factor that helped force Vice President Biden to the bargaining table, which in turn kicked off several weeks of frenetic negotiations that resulted in an agreement at the end of last month. Everything came together only a few days before the deadline on June 5. In January, the Treasury Department reached the statutory limit on the amount it could borrow, but it was still permitted to take extraordinary measures to pay the nation's debts, at least temporarily. Janet Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, had issued a warning earlier in the week that the United States was in danger of exceeding the debt ceiling on Monday. Yellen issued a warning to McCarthy in a letter dated May 26 in which she stated, "We now estimate that Treasury will have insufficient resources to satisfy the government's obligations if Congress has not raised or suspended the debt limit by June 5. McCarthy received this message. She cautioned that failure to do so would cause severe hardship to American families, harm our position as a leader in the global community, and raise questions about our ability to defend our national security interests. The final agreement, which was approved by the House of Representatives on Wednesday and by the Senate on Thursday, puts spending caps on the government and delays the increase of the debt ceiling until January 1, 2025, which is after the next presidential election. As the election season heats up, it provides lawmakers with budget targets for the following 2 years with the hope of ensuring that there will be budgetary stability. If a statutory ceiling on the national debt, which stands at $31.4 trillion at the moment, is raised, the federal government will be able to borrow additional funds with which to settle existing obligations. It was very necessary for this budget agreement to be approved. The stakes could not have been any higher, Vice President Joe Biden remarked on Friday evening from the Oval Office. He stated that a default on the country's debt would have been the single most disastrous event that might have occurred. Biden stated that no one got everything they wanted, but the American people got what they needed, underlining the compromise and consensus that was included in the arrangement. Both an economic crisis and an economic collapse were avoided by our actions. Biden took use of the occasion to highlight the accomplishments of his first term as he campaigns for re-election. Some of these accomplishments include assistance for high-tech industry, investments in infrastructure, and financial incentives for the battle against climate change. In addition to this, he highlighted how he thwarted efforts by Republicans to roll back his agenda and seek bigger cuts. "We're cutting spending and bringing down deficits at the same time," Biden remarked. "We are protecting important priorities such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and benefits for veterans, as well as our transformational investments in clean energy and infrastructure." Even while he promised to continue working with Republicans, Biden also drew differences with the opposition party, particularly when it comes to raising taxes on the affluent, which is something that the Democratic president has pushed to do. It was something that he mentioned could need to be put off until the second term. He told her, "I'm going to be coming back," and she believed him. "With your assistance, I'm going to come out on top." The Democratic president has provided the most in-depth commentary to date on the compromise that he and his administration achieved through the remarks made by Vice President Joe Biden. During the high-stakes talks, he kept a low profile in public as much as possible. This choice angered some members of his party, but it was made to provide space for both parties to agree and for parliamentarians to vote on sending it to his desk. Biden lauded McCarthy and his negotiators for conducting themselves in good faith during the negotiations, as well as all of the leaders in Congress for their work to ensure the fast passage of the law. They acted responsibly, and they put the good of the country ahead of politics, he said. In addition, the law increases funding for the military and veterans programs, reduces the amount of new money allocated to the Internal Revenue Service, and ignores Vice President Joe Biden's proposal to reverse Trump administration tax cuts for corporations and the rich to reduce the nation's deficits. However, the White House has stated that the IRS will continue with its intentions to strengthen the enforcement of tax rules regarding high-income taxpayers and corporations. The federal government can avoid the possibility of running out of funds and suffering the severe consequences of defaulting on its obligations thanks to the decision to raise the ceiling on the amount of debt that can be owed by the country. The Treasury will probably run out of resources if Congress does not take action to raise or suspend the debt ceiling within the next week. This will make it difficult, if not impossible, for the Treasury to fulfill its financial obligations. Despite this, negotiations that took place at the end of May resulted in a compromise on the debt limit, which culminated in the presentation of the Financial Responsibility Bill to Congress. The bill won approval in the House of Representatives with an overwhelming majority vote of 314 to 117 in favor of it. The act was approved by the Senate with a vote count of 63 to 36. The current borrowing ceiling of the federal government is capped at $31.4 trillion. This law will suspend that cap until January 2025, which is signed after the next presidential and congressional elections in the United States. After the debt ceiling was reached in January, the Treasury Department took measures to ensure that the United States continued to pay its payments. However, next week, those accounting gimmicks were expected to run out. The debt limit was reached in January. If Congress fails to pass its yearly spending bills, the agreement mandates an automatic overall cut of 1% to spending programs. This mechanism is designed to drive members from both parties to find a resolution before the end of the fiscal year in September. While there were more Democrats than Republicans who supported the legislation in both chambers, the support of both parties was essential to its success in becoming law. In the Senate, the vote was 63-36, with 46 Democrats, independents, and 17 Republicans in favor of the measure and 31 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and an independent who caucuses with the Democrats voting against it. Do you like it? Kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative videos.